Hi guys, DevilHunterXYZ, and today I got myself another movie review, and I know it's been quite some time since I've done one, but this time I went out to see Avatar: The Way of Water, and I gotta say, after roughly 12 years in the making, I gotta say it's a pretty good follow-up to the 2009 original, and I gotta say James Cameron did a pretty good job in my opinion, so let's dive right into it. Okay, so I guess for the plot summary, I'm going to try to condense it as much as possible because it was quite a long movie. So essentially, it just takes place roughly 10 years after the events of the first movie, and Jake and his wife Nitiri just trying to live normal life as regular Navi. They did eventually have children. How to write this one down? They had their oldest son Netiam, their youngest son Lowak, their daughter Tuk, and they have an adopted daughter named Kiri, who is actually Grace's avatar's daughter. Somehow he was able to give birth to that. I'm not sure how, but anyway, they're just more or less living their own lives, their everyday lives, trying to be regular Navi. Then eventually gets to the point where, as time passes, the Sky People end up coming back to Pandora, and amongst the Sky People, there was a group of recombatants, reformed soldiers from the previously been deceased, and of course, I don't know, somehow they were able to get their memories, their thoughts, their personalities implanted onto these new avatar-based beings, and essentially one of them being the Colonel from the first movie, Colonel Quaritch. And for the most part, it kind of becomes like a giant revenge plot where the Colonel is trying to track down Jake Sully for his demise in the first movie, and it gets to the point where his team and Colonel's team lands in Pandora. They eventually track down the Sully family, uh, and of course, amongst that, they ended up did kidnapping. Oh yeah, they ended up kidnapping Spider, a young boy named Spider, who was essentially a friend of the Sully family. So, but we also found out that Spider, this young little boy, was actually the human colonel's son. So after he got captured, Jake and his family decided it would be best to exile themselves from their own clan, the Omatikaya clan, and they eventually move on to another clan that's out in the seas, known as, what was it called, the Metkaina clan. And while they were treated as kind of hostile at first, considering their family was kind of made out of the known as the demon blood to Navi language. But anyway, they eventually were able to stay at that clan, eventually trying to adapt to the sea life, and it kind of becomes a little bit of a bunch of subplots. The youngest son Lowak ends up befriending a token, like a an intelligent sea creature that was kind of exiled from his own clan, from his own party, whatever. Then you got Kiri, who has like a deep spiritual connection to the sea, and I guess also able to connect with Awa. And for the most part, Jake and Nitiri are just they're trying to live out their new lives out in the sea, but I guess they know that they will never really be safe, as they will always be hunted down. And amongst that, eventually, the colonel and his team end up commandeering a whaling vessel along with the help of Spider, I guess. Um, anyway, they end up commandeering a whaling vessel, finding out this crew here was more or less capturing they're basically capturing the Tolkun for their brain enzymes to create anti-aging remedies. It's kind of odd. But anyway, with the help of that whaling crew, they're able to track down the you know the Sully family into the remote village area. But then afterwards, the colonel had the idea to try to massacre a bunch of these Tolkien to try to provoke the Navi for attacking. And I guess amongst that, somehow they eventually the colonel ends up kidnapping some of Sully's kids, and then it kind of goes into like a big fight with the Navi, and against the whaling crew and the Colonel. It kind of goes to like a huge scuffle, and eventually gets to the point where it becomes like a one-on-one fight between Sully and the Colonel. And in the end, Sully managed to take down the Colonel, but at the same time, the whaling vessel that they were on was sinking, collapsing, and it gets to the point where, uh, well, of course, it gets to the point where unfortunately, well, I guess beforehand, the older brother and Netium ends up being fatally wounded, unfortunately. Uh, so when one of the kids is gone, but again, they tried to take down the Colonel, which they did, and then eventually the ship starts to sink, and then of course the youngest son, Loak, ends up trying to save his father, and at the same time, the Kiri and her spiritual connection was able to help find her mother and Tuk, and eventually they end up escaping. Spider ends up finding the Colonel's body under the water. He ends up saving him for unknown reasons, really, but he ends up saving him. And at that point, after mourning the loss of his son, Jake vows to pretty much stay with the sea people and protect them from any future attacks. Well, for the good of the movie, a few things I can say. I do like the visual effects. I guess really the world setting, I should say, because we got a glimpse of what Pandora was like in the first movie, but it didn't even really explore much into it. But it's like now it's kind of further expanded. Besides being up in the trees like you were in the first movie, you're out in the oceans, the vast oceans, the seas, the underwater. A lot of underwater sections, and I'm pretty sure James Cameron spent a lot of time and his crew trying to capture the perfect water, I guess, perfect undersea areas. uh, yeah, I mean it's visually impressive. I'm it's visually impressive. The second thing I would probably say is quite a lot of action, surprisingly. I'd say it's about almost the same amount of action as the first movie. I mean, like I said, you had that first scuffle with the Colonel back in the original clan, the original village, and then of course you had the ongoing sea fight at the very end, which was pretty spectacular to say the least. So a lot of good action right there. And I guess really the third thing I'd probably say is I kind of do like the character dynamic. It for the most part, it's the kids trying to get used to their new setting, and trying to growing up, growing up into the seas essentially. But at the same time, it's like Sully is trying to become a good father, trying to teach his kids the right thing, trying to protect his family. So I mean, it has like a really good family dynamic right there. Well, for the bad, I can only think of really two things. I think one being kind of somewhat the plot. I mean, it's kind of cliche, kind of bare bones. It's another revenge type plot like we haven't seen before. You had the bad guy in the first movie gets killed, and he comes back in the second movie to try to get revenge. I mean, it's been done. Granted, they kind of put more of a little bit of a spin on this in this movie. But I mean, it's just the overall plot is more or less the same as any other cliche type movie. Uh, and I guess the second thing I could probably say is probably the pacing of the movie. Sad to say, there are like a lot of sections that are kind of just like at a crawl, like at a standstill. It kind of feels like they're just throwing it there just for padded timing. I mean, it's a 3 hour movie, but like a lot of the scenes, they're just kind of showing like I guess for instance like showing the beginning in the movie or showing the Sully family, which is fine, but it kind of drags out a little bit too long. And of course the same thing too when they move on to the other village, the other clan, the Mekaina clan. Anyway, trying to adapt to the new sea life. I mean, it was impressive seeing the underwater sections, but again, it just kind of drags too long. Trying to get all the practice of breathing underwater, swimming, and whatnot. It just kind of drags a little too long. And of course, probably also like the whole whaling scene about Colonel commandeering that ship, and seeing how the whalers are trying to make profit off it. In the end, it really didn't seem to really have any importance. It just seems it was thrown in there for no reason. Honestly, it didn't really didn't really contribute to the plot that much, really. Well, overall, I could say honestly, this movie is pretty good, in my opinion. You know, after waiting for over 12 years for a good sequel, I'd say it was worth the wait. I wouldn't say it's as good as the first movie, but it still was a pretty impressive movie nonetheless. It has some kind of similar beats to like maybe the first movie, but at the same time, I mean, it's kind of mostly involving family. That was kind of the whole dynamic of it. It was just involving family, and I guess also luckily you don't really need to follow up on the first movie. If you never saw the first movie, you can actually jump into this movie without really any context needed. Granted, I mean you still should see the first movie, but you know, for any new goers, they could actually jump into this, and it kind of gives you like a little bit of a summary of what happened in the somewhat what happened in the first movie, somewhat. But yeah, I mean you could jump into this without really any prior knowledge, and it will follow it pretty fine. Uh, but nonetheless, though, like some of these stuff from like the first movie kind of gets a little bit ignored. You know, like whatever happened to the unobtainium that the guys were trying to that the people were trying to get to make money off of. No idea whatever happened to that. You know, or really the rest of the human race. Honestly, like how come it took them this long to really try to get back to Pandora? But I mean, a lot of plot hole questions and well, a lot of unanswered questions, I should say, that's obviously kind of being set up for a sequel. Which I mean, it has been confirmed by Cameron himself that he's planning to do like a third, fourth, maybe fifth movie. Who knows? I mean, hopefully it won't take over a decade or so. But I mean, it seems like Cameron already has a good established franchise idea for this. So I mean, who's to say? Who's to say? Yeah, it's kind of strange seeing a sequel after all this time, but it kind of feels like I kind of wanted to see more of it. You know, I want to know more about the world of Pandora and what kind of plots that the next movies could bring. Who knows? It kind of makes you speculate on that. Uh, but I digress. Overall, though, I would probably give this movie a final score of an 8 out of 10. I'd say it's definitely worth the watch, and a really good follow up to the first movie, nonetheless. And you know, again, it's I mean, I gotta say, James Cameron really did himself this time. He really did a good job just producing this good movie. And I hope this will continue on for the rest of the franchise. Alright, guys, this is DevilHunterXYZ, and until next time.